Hello, and welcome to the Shaman Initiation Program. This class is on geese. Geese is the 5th totem out of 12 and the 2nd totem in the direction of the south. This class is about archetypes, symbol, and metaphor. So first, let me bring you to symbolism. Anything in nature that has a curvature is linked to individuation, the number 5, which is called the number of man. I'll explain that in a moment. The curvature, as you see here, of the Fibonacci spiral, which is the number of nature. Here, this is Da Vinci's Vitruvius Man, and he has this outer circle, which represents connecting to God or the cosmos, and the 4 extremities are linked to the 4 elements, but the human nature, which is the number 4. So now when we meet number 5, we're talking about spirit or the ether or the soul or the divine will. So you'll see it resembled as a circle. Here in the number 5, there is a curvature. Here in the geese or the swan, there's a curvature in the neck. So first of all, just identify when you start seeing curves in nature, it is linked to growth. So if you see it in nature and we are part of nature, then our curvature, our growth is similar. In the Kabbalion, one of the spiritual texts, it says that upwards and onwards, all growth is circular and spherical. We do not grow in a straight line. There's a metaphysical law called the law of octaves that shows that as we raise the 1 octave or the 1 level of consciousness that we're allotted in this lifetime, we go through a series of shocks. Nothing happens linearly when it's related to spirituality. The earthly world might have straight lines and represented by the number 4 or a square, but in spirit, it's always circular, spherical, has shocks, or not linear. So it's an important concept. So when you see the neck of the geese or the neck of the swan, you can identify the symbolism of the curvature. So this symbol here is called the Fibonacci spiral. The Fibonacci spiral, along with what's called the phi number or the golden mean, has believed to be the number of nature. They're not the exact same thing, but they're similar. So oftentimes it's clumped together. And what it does is it gives the spiral nature of the flower, of the pine cone, of the pineapple, and we grow in this exact same spiral nature. So there is a myth I mentioned previously in the Bible. When I showed you the tree, I showed you that the 3rd chakra in the fire was linked to Joseph, king of Egypt. So Joseph had been thrown in a ditch by his brothers because he had to defeat his pride. And that of the deadly sins is the deadliest. So when he was taken out of the ditch, he was adopted by a man named Potiphar, who then also felt he betrayed him. And then again, he was thrown into prison. What happened was that the Pharaoh in Egypt was continuously having this dream where he saw these 7 fat cows being swallowed by 7 skinny, vile cows, and he didn't know what the dream meant. So at that point, Joseph was able to come out and help the Pharaoh by interpreting the dream. So this story has a lot of symbolism that when we are down and out, we're learning to tame sort of the ego and the personality. And then once we have that correct use of fire, then we can come into the world and through our divine will be directed to serve our purpose, which is exactly what happened to Joseph. So Pharaoh asked him to interpret the fat cow, skinny cow dream. So the fat cows represent in astrology and astronomy Jupiter. Jupiter comes around every 12 years. When we are happy, things are going well, like Jupiter brings some really good times, we tend to not do any spiritual work. It's only through the skinny cow years that are Saturn cycles that come every 7 years that we tend to stop, be introspective, perhaps detached from something if it's taken from us. And it's the product of Jupiter, the fat cows, being eaten by Saturn, the skinny cows, that we get our number of man, which is how we learn to use our fire correctly. This is related to Joseph, the third chakra, being the king on our own throne. So this is my interpretation of this story, knowing astrology, knowing mythology. This is not something that you'll find elsewhere, but this symbolism extremely important. And so what we do is the product of what we've discovered or done during fat cows, and that in which we did or let go of or mourned or understood in our skinny cows, gives us the growth. So like I tell students, spiritual growth is ingrained in our soul. You are going to grow something. Now you get to decide, and this is why it's the number 5 linked to fire and free will. How much are you going to do during the fat cows, and how much are you going to do during the skinny cows? Which brings me back to the story of Joseph. The way that he interpreted the dream for Pharaoh was during the fat cow years, Egypt was going to have 7 years of bumper crops and then 7 years of famine. And he said, if we save grain during the years that we have feast, then Egypt will never suffer. And if we were to tackle our own spiritual life and our fire this same way, then we would also have spiritual growth in the dimensions of our third chakra, owning our fire and our throne. But what tends to happen is during fat cow years, when things are really good, we don't tend to do much in terms of our spirituality. It's when the universe or God knocks on your door and says, oh, we're taking this from you, or we're going to present a problem, that you're actually going to do some spiritual work. So the way to get a big number 5, like I say, I'm a spiritual glutton. You get to decide, do you want a little raisin-sized fruit on your tree? Because your tree will bear some fruit. It's already programmed in it. Or do you want to be a spiritual glutton like me? I want a jack-sized fruit of spiritual growth. And you get to choose. There's no wrong or right answer. And so your choices will determine how this spiral over here looks. Is it going to be small, or is it going to be a big sized curvature? So sacred geometry in nature helps to show us the exact same teaching, how big the fruit gets, how the spirals of the flower and the rose petals get, how the curvature of the pineapple gets. That's the symbolism of our soul's growth as well. There is no straight lines in nature, therefore there is no straight lines in our soul. The straight lines that you see here represented in this Fibonacci spiral are linked to the Saturn years or the skinny cow years, where life limits you. It's through the limits, it's through the depths of despair, it's through the constriction that you tend to grow more. But to even get ahead of it, use your fat cow years or the years that things are good to still do your spiritual work. And this is how you can individuate even more so. The number of man, number 5 is considered the number of man. Now, when we do the shaman wheel, we're in class number 5, which is individuation and fire. The opposite class is going to be the woodpecker. The woodpecker is the truth of service. You cannot have service, you cannot be of service. And at that moment, I'll teach you service as self and self as service and my chocolate chip theory of leadership. You cannot be of service or be a leader if you do not have self. So if you do not have individuation, then you really can't go into humanity and serve. This idea that you serve selflessly is incorrect. So this medicine directly leads us to the medicine of the woodpecker, which is service. So let's talk about the 5 elements and why fire is so important. There are 5 elements in the earth, and humans only have control over fire. So we'll start here with the Akash or ether, air, fire, water, and earth. And this is the way that everything is in creation, including ourselves. So the Akash or the ether is sort of like the heavens or the universal consciousness. Think of it as a sound wave, and it was before you were even conceived. So the thought of you was not even conceived yet. You were perhaps in heaven, Garden of Eden, whatever verbiage you like, universal consciousness, and you hadn't been sort of instructed yet to come in. So once you start deciding at the soul level that you're going to come in, then you find your parents that vibrate at the same vibration linked to your past karma. So here you see Akash or ether, chaos or space or universal consciousness. It's undifferentiated. There is no such thing yet as you, differentiated. And this is pre-incarnation. And here you have karma, but you have not yet identified what thread of karma you're going to live. Here's the air. This is the thought, limited negative thoughts that you inherit at the moment of conception. This is when you actually start becoming formed. So again, that ego personality, even though we don't live it out until later years, it actually all happens at the moment of conception, because ego simply means feeling separate from. And it was feeling separate from the Akash, the ether, the universal consciousness, because of a thought linked to the vibration and the karma that you came to burn in this lifetime had you choose your parents and you were conceived. However, that's not enough yet. Then we go to fire. This is our choice to incarnate. Perhaps you go into that womb and you choose this isn't the lifetime you want. These aren't the parents you want. This isn't the thread that you want. This is oftentimes miscarriages, abortions, or things that happen that the child decides to not be born. And I use that verbiage intentionally. This is not a religion class. This is not to determine what you believe about abortions and miscarriages. This is simply elements and how things form into creation. This is where choice as fire begins. And we know in the fetus that the vagus nerve starts in the gut and then goes up to the brain. This is why in Ayurveda, the fire or the Agni, the gut health in functional medicine is so important in Ayurvedic medicine, because it's actually linked to choice. The choices that you make, even from conception, deciding to continue in the creation process and be born, has to do with the fire element. This is the only element humans are in charge of. It is linked to free will, and the soul has that option. Next is water. Water is now pregnancy. It has to do with emotions. At this point, you got the emotion that we talked about in an owl. And then Prithvi or earth, which is the body, the physical body given to your parents when you're born. And it is attached to the desires that we learned about in Crow. So there's a lot going on here. Anytime we start something new, we create some chaos because we're trying to go to before the limiting thought that we got from our parents. So this is the impure thought of bear. We choose whether or not we're going to have that thought, buy into that low level consciousness, and or individuate. So here's fire, the suspension bridge. One of the things that's going to be controlled if you choose self, if you choose individuation, is the water. So the emotion that you learned in pregnancy, which was to feel hopeless, depressed, worthless, anxious, is suppressed a bit. It's sort of burned, if you will. And then the desires, which are linked to the earth or the crow, are somewhat accepted. So it's not that the emotions ever go away, they just burn and become appropriate. And doesn't that mean that the desires go away? We already talked about the unchangeable nature of the West. It's simply that, oh, I have pride, oh, I have lust, oh, I have greed. Yet, despite all of that, despite the emotion that shows up when I realize I'm flawed and have greed, and despite the impure thought that my parents taught me and that was low-level consciousness to have greed, I still can choose to rebirth myself, to move into the world, use my fire appropriately. Therefore, fire is the only element humans are in control of. Hence why it rules raising consciousness around the thought from conception, why it has to do with burning karma, why it has to do with choice, with individuation, and with free will. It also physically has to do with gut health, which is directly linked to mental health. So this is Hestia, and this is one of my favorite teachings, where I say to people, man your fires. What does this mean? Hestia was the goddess who manned the fires of the Agora in Greece. In the Agora, there were many, many temples and cult worship going on, all dedicated to different gods. However, Hestia was the one in charge of the main fire in the center of the Agora. She was not permitted to participate in any of the other cult worship or rituals. If someone wanted to come give her an offering, they could. So this is you individually. This is also you in your family. This is you at work. This is you in your relationships. And envision that you're a circle. Half of the circle, what I call the 48 to 52, is dedicated to you, your throne, and your fire. You do not give anybody ever 48 to 52% of your time, your money, your resources. Resources is another word for energy or fire. All other people, so at work, let's say there's 20, then those 20 have to split the 48 to 52. At work, at home, there's 2 children and a husband. They split the 48 to 52. In your bowling league, there's 18 people. They split the 48 to 52. This part here is called manning your fires. Don't get off your throne. Don't dim your fire as much as possible. Now, we understand that in the walking the suspension bridge and making choices, sometimes you're going to go a little extreme on either end. That's okay. This 48 to 52 is a 5% range so that you don't go off any extreme, like the 0 to the 100. So you're always within a balance. You might do a little bit more or a little bit less for someone, depending on the situation. And you can reevaluate that after you've made the choice. But if you use this parameter as 48 to 52, as staying on your throne, owning your fire, not only is your gut health, your mental health, your emotional health, your spiritual health, your financial health, your sexual health, all of these pillars of health, which we're going to talk about more in order, are going to be intact because you're going to be making choices rooted in your value systems. That's how you man your fires. So the only exception, there's one exception to the rule, is if you have a child that is 14 and under. Children that are 14 and under still remain in your spiritual umbrella. Those children that are 14 and under are allowed to be on your 48 to 52. As soon as they turn 14, they move over to this side of the throne. So I want you to use this visual because we're going to see this again in Woodpecker when I teach you about the chocolate chip theory of leadership. We're going to use the same model. So if you can just envision that you are this section and everything and everyone else that isn't related to your time, money, and resources, and at least 48 to 52% of it goes over here, this will be how you can man your fires. And then you will be individuating and behaving the beginning stages of adulting that lead to spiritual adulting. So this is what I call my yellow brick road. So just up until where we've reached already being the most important class and to where we're headed, okay? So quick story of Dorothy, she's in Kansas. She gets a tornado and we assume it's a dream, leads her to Oz. She walks the yellow brick road. She meets 3 characters on the road. Then she meets the Wicked Witch. She is said to kill the Wicked Witch, and then she will be given the gift of getting herself home. This is similar to our same path. So what is low-level consciousness? The serpent, Kansas. before she reaches Oz, okay? So low-level consciousness is what you get at the moment of conception. Now, she meets the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion. Thoughts, the Scarecrow needs a brain, are the bear. Tin Man needs a heart, the emotions, the owl. The Cowardly Lion needs courage, desires, crow. So you start seeing that she meets her unchangeable nature on the road. What happens is that Dorothy, she's the one that gets to choose. You are in the story, Dorothy. You have the red ruby slippers on. You get to decide how you're going to walk forward or stay put, stay asleep in the forest as she did. So you have all the tools to get yourself home, learning how to use your fire appropriately and making choices. Now, further along the path, she meets the Wicked Witch. We're going to meet the Wicked Witch, or the Shadow, as we enter the East in Falcon. It starts with Wolf, then Falcon, and then Beaver. Then she realizes that the Oz is a fraud. So all of those people on pedestals, anyone that you think has the answers outside, which is what we understand in Beaver, that you have the unified consciousness and that you are the teacher and the guru you've been seeking. We encounter all of this in the East. And then we get to click our heels and bring ourselves home in the North. So this is where we're headed, but this is the most important class, because if we don't learn to make choices, if we don't learn to use our fire, then we will be guided by our low-level consciousness.